Welcome to Of Mics and Memory Cards, a complete rundown of the PlayStation 1 game library, all 4,105 of them. My name is Tyler, and today I am joined by...
My name is Jacob.
And I am Kameron.
And today we're going to be talking about Tekken 2. That's right, we are starting with the second one, not the first, for reasons that I'm sure Jacob would love to share.
Yeah, so we recently all got together. We're a bunch of old college buddies. And we took a trip up to one of the islands, Whidbey Island, off the coast of Seattle, and where we were seeing our buddy in a play. It was, for some of us, a 4-hour trip. For others, i.e. me, an 8-hour trip just to get there. And we found, upon arriving at the place where we would be staying, we found a pristine, like never been touched PlayStation 1, classic PlayStation 1 console, right? Before they called it the PlayStation 1, it was just the PlayStation. And there were two games available to us there. There was Tekken 2, and the other game was FIFA 2000. And considering that we are all ginormous football fans, we decided that we would set FIFA to the side and instead engage in a lot of Tekken 2 mayhem. And that's what brings us to our inaugural episode here today.
Really, we're celebrating our friendship.
Yes, that's true. Yeah, just a couple of bros beating on each other. What is everyone's history with the Tekken series, if you have any?
I've always grew up on the Nintendo side when I was younger. So I had the NES, the Super Nintendo, and then the Nintendo 64. The PlayStation was always the console that my friends had or my cousins had, so I never really got to play it on my own. It was always whenever I visited them. So the original Tekken games I played very sparingly, and I liked fighting games. I was more Mortal Kombat and Street Fighter at the time, but Tekken I've always wanted to get into a little more, and that didn't happen until I got a PSP and got Tekken Dark Resurrection with it. So that's really the game where I have the most of a relationship with.
Dude, that is hilarious. Was that a game that came with the PSP, Dark Resurrection?
I don't think it came with the PSP. I got it later.
It's just funny to me because I had completely forgotten about that game because I also had Tekken Dark Resurrection on the PlayStation Portable, and I don't really remember anything about it. I barely remember anything about the PSP except for the UMD hard case discs that were plugged into it. Man, what a console, what a handheld that was.
And then ever since, that's kind of been it. I didn't really play the Tekken Tag tournaments. I didn't really do much of Tekken 6 or even Tekken 7, but that's kind of as far as I go when it comes to how I am with these games. It's really just Tekken Dark Resurrection for the PSP.
Okay, all right. Well then, yeah. Let me show you some real rich history with the Tekken series. Now, I believe you just name checked it. Tekken Tag Tournament, I think, was on the PS2, if I'm not mistaken. And
I think so.
For at least Tyler and I think part of your time alive too, Kameron. It was the PS2 era of Tekken games is what I got into.
Correct.
And before I really got into theater, this would have been my freshman year of high school, and I was, kind of a not really a loner, but I was a little bit you're figuring it out. It's this whole brand new ecosystem that you got to figure out, who you're the prey to and who you're a predator to when you're in high school.
That was my exact thought as walking through the halls. I was like, who am I going to eat today and who's going to eat me?
Tyler was the biggest bully.
I mean, look at him. I mean, you can't if you're listening to this, but I can. He looks like a bully.
I'm a locker shover.
He's 6'4",
full head of hair,
215 pounds.
All muscle.
Yeah, all muscle.
I'm a sinewy kind of guy.
Across the street from my high school in my hometown was the church that I'd grown up going to. It was basically north of the school, and then west of the school and the church was this apartment complex, and there was I guess a minister, not a priest, a preacher, whatever, a non-denominational leader speaker at the church. It's where he lived. He was maybe 24, right, early 20s. Didn't have his life figured out, but to 14, 15-year-old me, it's whoa, your own apartment, this is so cool. He would have me and a bunch of my other friends who were, young Christian boys, come on over during our lunch hour, and we would order Little Caesars pizza, right? classic right there, and just play the absolute shit out of Tekken Tag Tournament. And that was probably, for me at least, like, I think maybe the formative fighting game experience. I had never had anything like that. In fact, just the other day, I was sort of thinking about the ways in which, like, I think, cut my teeth outside of Tekken Tag Tournament on Super Smash Bros. When it came to fighting. And it's because these 2-player versus match fighting games always felt kind of intimate, you know? Like, at least in Super Smash Bros., it's 4 players, right? Like, you have 3 losers, 1 winner. So even if you're losing, you're kind of winning because you're doing it with more people. But in Tekken or Mortal Kombat or Street Fighter, any 1v1 game, it's like if you lose, unequivocal, man, you are a loser.
Yeah, it becomes more personal that way. And especially since, a lot of these games started in the arcades, like you're there physically with them, and you either build a rapport in the arcade, or you just kind of get the reputation of, oh, this guy fucking sucks.
Yeah, that's not who you want to be. You don't want to be the guy who sucks, but also, like, I kind of don't want to be the guy who, like, can kick everyone's ass. I mean, I know we just established that Tyler's sort of the alpha male of the group, but for me, that's just not a moniker that fits.
Oh yeah, I mean that's what it was in Whidbey. Tyler was the alpha male in Whidbey when it came to us playing Tekken.
That's true. That's a fact. He also drove us around everywhere. Man with a car, sexy thing.
That's true. Yeah, I just get that, what is it, the BDE. Jacob, I was really worried when you were talking about the intimacy and the young preacher that this was going to be a story about you getting groomed, and I'm really happy it did not go in that direction.
Oh, no. We've got at least until episode 5 before we start getting into the real personal details.
My history of Tekken is also with Tekken 5, which was the original release of Dark Resurrection on the PS2. I was more of a Soul Calibur guy growing up. Soul Calibur 2 was my intro to fighting games, and then Smash Bros, of course. The PS2 version of Tekken 5 has, I forget what it's called exactly, it's like an arcade mode or like arcade classics, and Tekken 2 is one of the games on there. They have 1, 2, 3, and like Star Soldier, a random shooter. And so I did play a bit of 2 at the time, so it would have been the arcade version. I think I might have made it through once after struggling for like 3 hours or something. But prior to playing Tekken 2 at this beachside house in Washington, I hadn't actually really touched the game that much. But I did recently go through the bad story mode of Tekken 7 and have been playing the shit out of that. Actually winning matches online, which is a very new experience for me.
That is a great experience.
There was this one guy who kept challenging me as Paul, and I don't know if he was like, maybe he was a kid or something. He was just getting decimated every time. And there comes a point where you don't feel good about it anymore. You're like, don't get back up, man. Yeah. I'm the alpha male here. Playing as my main is Asuka, so I'm the little like schoolgirl, which is really more my type in high school anyway. That was really more what I resembled.
I think I had a similar experience online because like I said, I didn't really do much Tekken 7, but I had a period, maybe like a week or two, where I tried Tekken 7 and went online and did some matches. And I had a similar story where I came across this dude who kept challenging me over and over. And the first time was because he destroyed me like completely. Like it was like embarrassing. And he like wanted to play me again. So I figured he thought maybe it was because I was like easy pickings or something like that. I don't remember what character I was using. It might have been Brian Fury, I think, the character with like the robot heart or something like that. He did not win after that. Like he defeated me once, and that was about it. And then he kept challenging me over and over and over to like, I don't know, redeem himself. So like that felt really good, but that was the extent of my Tekken 7 experience. I feel like I got everything I needed out of that one online set of matches.
And that's the story of how we're all great at video games and cool guys.
Yes, we definitely were not bullied at all when we were in high school. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, Tekken 5, that was like a late PlayStation 2 release, right? Like one towards the end. I remember the cover. It was like orange, and I really only remember the color orange from it, but boy, did it look cool.
Yeah, I want to say it was '05, so definitely later in the lifespan, kind of right before the PS3 hit the market.
Yeah. Like, basically predated God of War 2 as far as, like, big releases on PlayStation.
So let's talk a bit about the history of Tekken 2. So Tekken 2 is the sequel, unsurprisingly, to 1994's Tekken. The second game was released to arcades in 1995 and then ported to the PlayStation the following year. Now, folks may be wondering why we're starting off with 2 rather than 1. Now, there is the story we told about Whidbey Island and that fabled copy of the second game, but I would argue that while Tekken 1 has a certain place and 3 is where the series really took off, 2 is where the series began to form crucial elements of its identity, namely the ways the plot would twist in ways that extend past a simple fighting game tournament repeated yearly, and the iterative building of its core gameplay, and an abundance of additional modes that are added to the home port. This focus on refining the home experience and really broadening the scope and appeal of the fighting game is something that has echoed throughout gaming history and into today. Now, we'll speak in depth on Tekken 1 at a later time, but it's worth noting just a few basics. In 1994, Namco, which is Tekken's developer, known now as Namco Bandai, drafted some talent who worked on Sega's Virtua Fighter the year prior. What I find staggering is the speed with which fighting games took the leap to 3D, with Street Fighter II having only come out 2 years prior in February of 1991. We'll also need to yada 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 through Namco's history, which, like Nintendo, is a company which itself is older than video games as a concept, having been founded in 1955. The quickest of bullet points is that in the 1980s, Namco created Pac-Man, Xevious, Pole Position, and the Tower of Duraga, and stand as not only one of the most prolific arcade developers of all time, but also created or influenced entire genres for decades. And while the star was no longer on the rise in the 90s, they again made a name for themselves as pioneers in the arcade field, with 93's Ridge Racer getting beat again to the 3D genre punch by Sega, who released Virtua Racing a year prior.
Wow, so Sega's just dropping these Virtua titles like right before, just a year before. They come up with these great titles, and Sega's all like Virtua Racing, Virtua Fighter,
Virtua Cop.
There you go. Yeah.
The Virtua series is like one of the biggest, like, unsung, like, I don't know, 3D, like, it's not a series, but it's just this thing that's existed. I don't really have any history with it. I forget about it all the time, but it seems like the most influential thing that nobody ever plays anymore. It's like those firsts, and then it just kind of goes away. I don't know. I
mean, I would say except for the Virtua Fighting series, which has lasted longer than the other two, because like Virtua Racing, I think there was also Sega also had Daytona USA, which I think was their biggest like racing arcade game at the time, but Virtua Cop was like a light gun shooter, and those didn't last very long. But you know, Virtua Fighter like had a series going basically up until like the Xbox 360, PlayStation 3 days with like Virtua Fighter 5, I think 5 or 6, I can't remember. But
no, you're absolutely right. It looks like an enhanced remaster of Virtua Fighter 5 Ultimate Showdown was released for the PlayStation 4 just as of today, 3 years ago.
Like Tyler was saying, like Sega beat Namco to the punch when it came to like pioneering these 3D polygonal arcade games. But Namco's had, or I guess now it's Bandai Namco, just had a longer lasting legacy, or just they're able to stay relevant.
It's funny that Sega had that kind of like war going on the console front with Nintendo, but then with the arcade front, it was like against Namco, and it was that sort of tit-a-tat, trying to one-up each other at all points, which is maybe why Sega stretched itself too thin. I think people focus on the console market a lot, but they were really big arcade developers and really were kind of another sort of unsung pioneer in that space.
Do we have any like equivalent of that like today, like arcade developers? Maybe not necessarily at war with one another, but just like dedicated arcade. Okay.
No, it's like because like arcades are kind of dying. Like I think the last like Sega, like I can't remember the exact thing, and I only know this because of all the Yakuza I've been playing, but like the last like Sega like major arcade like just closed down in Tokyo or something like that.
Yeah.
But it's like pachinko machines now mostly, like from Konami.
In the US, the nature of the arcade I think has changed to more of like the Dave and Buster's. Like when you go in, they're using familiar language. It's like there's Space Invaders games, but they're ultra casual. and usually operated with like a touch screen or something that's like more tactile. But I'm always surprised that there's stuff still getting made. I saw like a Luigi's Mansion arcade machine the other day, or like there's one that was like a little Ghostbusters thing that you'd move around, and it feels like playing a mobile game. It's got that kind of very limited scope, just kind of there to take up space for maybe drunk adults at Dave & Buster's. So it's changed.
I've played at an arcade here in Austin, Temple Run. Or Temple Run 2, like at the arcade, and it's got like the whole like ball on the pad that you're moving, right? Like it feels very classic. We do have, or it feels classic, but it's this, it's a mobile game. So I wonder, I guess that is probably the avenue arcade has really gone, but we don't need to spend any more time on it. I was just curious.
Going back to Tekken, the first Tekken was directed by Seiichi Aishi. Am I saying that name right, Cameron? Do you know?
I want to say it's Ishii.
Ishii.
Seiichi Ishii.
I think honestly the only way that we're going to be able to tell for sure is if Cameron says it in his best Japanese accent.
I am not doing that.
Canceled episode 1.
We're going to get canceled immediately.
Seiichi was the coordinator and main designer of Virtua Fighter, and is a sadly forgotten name as one of the fathers of the 3D fighter, who ended his directing career with the absolute head-scratcher that is The Bouncer. Did anyone play The Bouncer?
I loved The Bouncer. I'm going to go ahead and say it. I loved that game. It was the second game that I got for my PlayStation 2, with the first one being Onimusha. But The Bouncer was my second game, and this was like before I even knew what like Squaresoft was. Or I didn't put together that these were the same people that did the Final Fantasy games, because it's just such a different.
It looks like the Warriors, but built into like the familiar sort of SquareSoft model.
Yeah, I think it was Tetsuya Nomura, right?
Oh, those are Nomura designs all the way, man. How many belts do they have?
All the chains, all the zippers.
We need something like comically oversized like Disney shoes. Both Tekken 1 and 2 were developed for the Namco System 11 arcade board, which is a joint venture between Sony and Namco, partially based on a PS1 prototype, essentially crafted as an answer to Virtua Fighter itself. Now, it's for this reason that the PlayStation and arcade ports of Tekken 1 and 2 run so closely to one another, as they're built using similar, if not in many ways identical hardware. It's worth noting that Soul Blade, the predecessor to Tekken's sister series Soul Calibur, runs on the same hardware and also shares a sizable chunk of development staff, not to mention character Yoshimitsu. There's a lot of crossover between those two series. Much of the development staff between Tekken 1 and 2 are also shared, including main programmer Masunori Yamada, who would stay with the series up to Tekken 6, character designer Kenichi Isozaki, programmer Yoshihito Saito, and music and sound headed by Yoshi Takeyanagi and Yoshi Arakawa. I nailed all of them. I'm sure that was perfect. No one corrected me.
I think our Japanese audience is going to be really disappointed in our pronunciation.
In fact, the largest difference between the original staff and the sequels is not in the arcade versions, but in the home versions. While Seiichi Ishii is the director for both versions of Tekken 1, he only directed the arcade version of Tekken 2, what the home version attributed to Masamichi Abe, who was a coordinator for the first game, who would go on to direct Tekken 3, co-direct the first two Pikmin games, and then do assorted work for Nintendo as recently as 2023, where he was an associate producer on F-Zero 99. I don't understand the trajectory of that career.
What is it that makes a game series stand this test of time? We're talking F-Zero 99, right? 2023. We're talking about the first two Pikmin games. How many Pikmin games are there now?
They just released the fourth one.
Yeah, basically 4.
Pretty wild. Like, I remember, when that gets dropped on GameCube, right, in that first game. And so, like, those are always the two I think of. I'm not even really aware of these other ones that were being made. But what do you guys think is the difference between a game series that maybe gets a couple of entries in and then dies out versus a series like Tekken or like any of these other games that really go on these 20, 30, even 40
I mean, I think the cynical
legacies?
answer is capitalism, which ones are making money. For Pikmin, there's 4 games, but that is 4 games over the course of like 20 years. They're games that sell okay and then have more of a cult following. It's tough with Tekken only technically having like the upcoming 8 games, but there's also like re-releases in between there, and we'll sort of talk later about how the reason Tekken 2 was developed is more or less just to continue to make money for Namco. So I don't know. I don't love that answer because it feels like the companies are insincere,
cynical.
Yeah, it feels pretty cynical, but I think there's some truth in it.
Yeah, I mean, it's also I think a matter of these games carving out their own spaces that I guess like audiences or consumers are looking for. Like especially within the fighting game space, you had Street Fighter dominating both arcade and home, and then Mortal Kombat set to do that, but they added the violence and the gore and like kicked it up a notch. So that was their space that they carved out for it. For the people who thought Street Fighter looked too cartoony or was even like looked too Japanese, they wanted something with that looked a little more real and like more mature. And since Mortal Kombat had the like digitized sprites, it like they gravitated towards that. And then you had Virtual Fighter and Tekken, which wanted to do what both of those games did, but put it in a 3D space. And I think that's where they where they made their mark. And I feel like I don't want to say it was like it's necessary, but I think that's where the staying power came from, is like they had a specific goal of like where in the fighting game space they wanted to live, and they stuck there. I don't know if that made any sense, but
I got you.
That does make sense. Yeah, especially because we're talking about how these games, they're being developed at such a young adolescent period, right, for video games, and so they're moving in and they're finding, okay, what are these 2D side scrollers not providing? And then it's all like, okay, we're going to push that envelope. We're going to do 3D. We're going to have these, polygonal models and whatnot. And like you said with Mortal Kombat. Anyway, I'm just reiterating what you said and interpreting it for clarity's sake. So.
Now, it's difficult to trace the development of Tekken 2 on the English-speaking web. From what I gather, Tekken 1 and 2 were both sort of highly experimental games developed primarily to spark interest for Namco's games in a specifically American market. What I do know is that many developers of the series, outside of the poached talent from Virtua Fighter, hadn't worked on anything prior to Tekken 1. When you go look through their Moby Games profiles, for many of them it starts with Tekken 1, for some of them ends with Tekken 2. This was their only experience. In one of the few English historical logs on Tekken development that I could find, it's by industry consultant Jerry Momoda, the tenets of Tekken were as follows. Head-to-head competition, which is a given. They were making a fighting game. Close hand-to-hand fighting with more of an emphasis on real-world techniques as opposed to Street Fighter's very cartoony aspects. Skill and technique-based, not speed or button mashing like Street Fighter or Mortal Kombat, respectively. Specifically avoid gratuitous violence. Mortal Kombat kind of had cornered the market on it, but they wanted to keep an edge. There's a cool 90s edge feeling. And then a comparatively low price based on some other competitors. Jerry claims to have pitched these ideas to Namco, and then his pitched ideas would eventually develop into Tekken. Or, again, so he claims. This is one industry consultant blogging on the internet 20 years after the fact. I don't know that this guy necessarily is really the father of Tekken. Like, oh, I went to Japan and convinced all the higher-ups, like, make exactly this kind of game. But I do know that these are basically the tenets that the series was founded on. Now, in Japan, Tekken 2 for the arcade came out just 5 months after the release of Tekken 1 for the PlayStation. In general, it's difficult to find the driving force to create Tekken 2 so soon after the release of Tekken 1. However, I can theorize that while Street Fighter 2 remained the same game but iterated with different releases using slightly different names, the plan with Tekken was to do something similar but further distinguished by just slapping on a new number. There's also the relatively young age of the fighting genre. Trends can move pretty quick, and so there was no guarantee that fighters as a concept would be more than a flash in a pan, so there was incentive to just move really fast on those releases. While Tekken was and would continue to be a genuinely innovative series, just like any other product, the drive to create was driven by monetary interest and focus testing. So a lot of what we were just talking about. If it wasn't for capitalism, we wouldn't have Tekken.
Hooray for capitalism. I think we can all agree that, technically speaking, capitalism has been nothing but a boon for the video game industry. No problems there, right? Working as intended.
You're, like, joking, but in a way, like, it is sort of the necessity of creation there. I think there's a lot of ways it's hindered individual creators specifically really recently, but in those sort of more primordial times, it was like everyone was always looking for the next best thing, which did in many ways drive the creativity as well as the need to put out things really quickly. I feel like Tekken was sort of created as a result of that, as well as a lot of other sort of newer or unique ideas.
Growing up in the 90s and the early 2000s, there was always this like idea in my head that if you were just to look across the Pacific, right, and look at Japan, I had this idea of Japan as like this just like uber futuristic society, right? Like everything was in vending machines that had mechanical arms that would just give you whatever you wanted based on your like particular input. It just felt, and so like you consider just the growth of these sort of nascent industries, and the story of capitalism really intertwines with a kind of consumer technology, or I guess really the way that I want to put this is there anything else that shows that sort of fusion of East and West in terms of growth of like capitalism outside of industry like maybe television, video games, just sort of consumer electronics, right? That's, you can look elsewhere to see the way that maybe agriculture or other industries just become these sort of capitalistic monoliths. But really it's this fusion of Japan and North America that is what allows the consumer electronics industry to explode the way that it did in the 90s and early 2000s.
No, that's fascinating, though. Well, especially with Japan sort of post-economic bubble era, there was a bit of like desperation in the air, and the way that I think America and Japan in many ways economically traded places. Like when you go back to, I think it's Back to the Future 2, and they project the future where all American companies have been purchased out by Japanese companies. There's this really sort of like, in retrospect, very xenophobic fear that technological advancement would take over American markets, which then drove American markets and creators to try and create newer, better things. And there was this sort of weird competition between the two.
And not only that, like if you also look at like over the summer, right, we had these UAW strikes, right, the auto workers, and a lot of what they were fighting for in their strikes was a return to the kind of union workplace that predated this sort of fear over Japanese vehicles. That was the understanding, is that like, because a lot of this is, you know, my baseline understanding here is that these Japanese automakers are not unionized workplaces, right? Like that is such an American innovation, this idea of unionized workforces, and all the threats that were coming. It's like, oh, people aren't going to be buying GMC or it predates Stellantis, but like just these American-made cars, because these Japanese ones, they're better, they're smaller, they're more fuel efficient, and they're cheaper. And therefore, these industries like, oh, well, we can't really work with, you know, the union anymore. The union's detrimental, so let's work with them to suppress wages instead of explode them. I don't know, and I just find that it is weird to think about how entwined our economies are, America's and Japan's, and yet how foundational xenophobia is in that relationship.
It's funny, Tyler, that you mentioned Back to the Future, that like part 2, like they showed a future where it's all, you know, bought out and whatever. But I also specifically remember in Back to the Future part 3 when they're in 1955, and I don't remember what device they were looking at, but Doc was looking at a device that Marty had, and this is 1955 Doc, and he's like, oh, no wonder this thing isn't working. It's made in Japan. And then Marty's response is, well, yeah, all the best things are made in Japan. And Doc's response to that was like magnificent, or like wow, basically like just such disbelief. So yeah, if we're gonna talk about like the xenophobia, like that movie kind of nailed it right there.
All right, petition to make this a Back to the Future podcast where we just talk about the racial insensities of the Back to the Future franchise
and economics in the 80s and 90s. You know, we're all very well versed in economics with our theater degrees.
Yeah, we don't know at all what we're talking about.
No, I have no idea. Let's talk more about Tekken 2. Tekken 2 was first released in Japanese arcades on June 21st, 1995, with an American release on August 24th of that same year. The PS1 version then released again, first in Japan, March 29th, 1996, 96, and in the US on August 27th of 96, and then the Europeans got it in October of that year. For context, this puts us right around the era of Quake and Mario 64, which came out in June of 96, and Crash Bandicoot comes out in September. So we're just around the advent of polygonal graphics sort of coming into their own after figuring themselves out for a few years.
That same weekend, do you guys know what the number one movie in America was the weekend Tekken 2 released?
You told us and I forgot.
Same.
It's Mortal Kombat. Mortal Kombat was adapted into a movie, and then it was the largest. So America was in the fighting spirit in late August of 1995.
I like that you mentioned Quake and Mario 64 and Crash, since this is like during the 3D adolescence where they didn't quite get it yet, but they just really wanted to experiment with this 3D space. And like we can talk about this when we do the Crash episode, but like the very first Crash Bandicoot game, like yes, while it was in 3D, you really was just moving from point A to point B, and it didn't really utilize that 3D space all that well. And then you had Mario 64 that just like really utilized its 3D space, as well as Quake added like verticality to it. But then it's interesting that with fighting games being specifically played on 2D planes, like how do we take that and then move it into 3D? Because I think Tekken 1 didn't really have, you couldn't really sidestep, right? Like you couldn't move like on that axis, right? It wasn't until like Tekken 2 you were able to do that. So I find it really interesting that like Tekken 2 coinciding with the releases of these other like very well-versed 3D games was the Tekken where it's like, you know what? We're not going to stay on this 2D plane. Let's also move back and forth and sidestep and add this like entirely new plane into the mix.
And Tekken 2 is still pretty limited with it. I don't think they added if you double tap up or down in most Tekkens, you do either like a front step or a back step, or step into the foreground or the background. I don't think that's in Tekken 2, but I know there's a couple of moves specifically that shift your position. There's like one Heihachi move where it's like back, I think, and then the two kick buttons, and he does this little like shuffle back and around, and then I know there's a Yoshimitsu move as well. So it's more limited.
She just sidesteps and does like a backwards roundhouse kick, but like it does put her out of the way. It does change her positioning, which she ended up being my favorite character while playing this. So I'm gonna talk about June a lot.
It's funny tracing it back from Virtua Fighter, which, as I understand, doesn't really take advantage of the 3D space at all. It's just a 2D fighter, but they're in 3D. Tekken has like one move where you can shift slightly, and then Tekken 2, and so it's this sort of iterative, again, building on concepts. Just before we get into the gameplay, the one other weird thing about the arcade versus PlayStation release, there are 3 versions of the arcade game. It's not that uncommon with fighting games. They go through rebalancing updates. There's always players who find out things that the developers didn't notice, or find some exploit or infinite combo or juggler or whatever. So it would go through those balancing updates. Patching fight games has always been a thing. The PS1 version is based on the final revision, so what you have with the console release is a more finalized product than the arcade game, fixes some bugs and modifies the AI. From what I understand, it's pretty wildly different between the arcade versions. There's one that is very combo focused, which I think is what the arcade game or the home console version lands on, but there's also some that are more like guard based that just kind of chip away at the player. So it's funny how different they are. I was not expecting that.
When we were playing this up on the island, one thing that I very quickly discovered was just how like unfamiliar I was with the control scheme, right? Like we're going back just about 30 years now, and the way that fighting games have evolved, just like the fluidity to it, up until actually you wrote this outline, Tyler, I could not have told you that it was that each button on the controller was a limb that you controlled, which is why my stature in every fight that I took on was to crouch and then just lower kick whatever enemy came at me until they died.
Jab 'em in the shins. So the basic concept of Tekken is each of the 4 face buttons, or in the arcade, there's just 4 buttons, corresponds to one limb. So square and triangle are right and left fist, and then X and circle are the 2 kicks, the 2 legs. And then the way that Tekken works is there's high, medium, and low hits. So if a fighter is just standing typically, they will automatically block, I think it's medium and high, and then if you crouch, then you block the low. So the defensive game is to anticipate if your opponent is going high, medium, or low, and then block appropriately, and then judge based on where they're at if you can hit them high, medium, or low. And I think the trick with if they're crouching is you can hit them with medium, and they can't block that. So there is a decent amount of strategy to it. It's very tactical. Like, Tekken, in comparison to other series, to me, feels very much about reading the wind-up of other moves, whereas, like, Street Fighter, there's kind of, like, 2 frames for a punch, and it's more about the frenetic energy of it. Tekken is all about reaction time and then sort of the sight game of what the other person's about to do.
Well, even like memorizing other characters' combos too. Like you start to see all of their tells when they're winding up, and like which high, medium, or low they're about to hit first. So you get used to seeing basically the order of their combos, like Kazuya's like famous like 8-hit combo. You know exactly where he's gonna hit, so it becomes easier to defend if you're like quick enough for it. Yeah.
I see. When I played it, I was like, in many ways, I felt like I was improving steadily, not unlike the way I might if I was an actual MMA fighter, right? Like, I'm getting in there and I'm terrible and everybody's kicking my ass. But then, I learn like, I figure out some kicks, I figure out some punches, I figure out a good combo, and then I'm like, okay, all right, so this is how I do it. This is how I win. Right, I've got my signature move, and then I can crouch and kick the shins, and if I can just do some combination of those 2 things together in the right order, I can get through just about any fight up until, what was it, Battle 6 in the Tekken tournament. I think it was Battle 6 when shit hit the fan and got real for us.
It felt like every time we were like, this game is so easy. Like, why? What is the point of this? I'm just knocking them out consistently, and then there's just a dramatic shift in difficulty, and you just get whooped every time.
It spikes up, and it like doesn't even give you a warning, because it wasn't like a gradual rise in difficulty either. Like stage 6, all of a sudden it got real, and it's such a skill check right there.
Yeah, I love it when a game refuses to let me feel good. It builds up my confidence, making me feel, it's like it's really providing me this like meaningful experience. I'm feeling love, honestly. I'm really attached to it, and then boom, drops the hammer.
Are you saying that Tekken is the Dark Souls of fighting games?
I think Dark Souls is the Tekken of Dark Souls games.
I really think that the PS1 is the Dark Souls of consoles.
I think Sega is the Dark Souls of video game developers.
I think video game developers are the Dark Souls of... I don't got anything there.
The Dark Souls are the friends we made across the way. So we talked about difficulty. That's primarily in the arcade mode, but the home version of Tekken 2 also adds additional modes. And this, in a lot of ways, is the first fighting game to do this for a home market, or at least to the level that Tekken 2 did, which feels kind of reductive when you look at it in retrospect. There's really just a couple of little added modes that aren't that different from the generic arcade mode, but it's worth talking about. Team Battle is the one that I thought is most interesting, and to me seems like the most fun with friends, which is instead of rounds, there's the standard, in arcade, 2 rounds, you win 2 rounds with the same character, you move on to the next stage. But in Team Battle, instead of rounds, each loss makes the player take a new character, and this can happen up to 8 times. So the little versus screen is like...
did we not play this way? This sounds awesome. We
didn't have enough characters at the time.
Yeah, it doesn't start with enough characters, yeah.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, we didn't have a memory card, so we were trying to earn them.
Which is, we can get to that when we get to the character section, but the way that the arcade and the home console ports release characters or have you unlock characters is different as well. Other additional modes are time attack, which is arcade mode with a timer. There's nothing else about it. You just can't change the settings, so it's set on medium, and then it records how long it takes you to go through. There's also survival, which is beat as many people as you can on just one health bar, and there is a practice mode, which is fairly common practice now, but at the time, an ability to practice combos and not just be constantly getting your ass beat while you're doing that was pretty new. It also shows inputs for combos, so you can select a combo, it'll show it on screen, and then you mimic it. It was also very, user-friendly for the time, whereas other fighting games, it kind of felt like they were obscuring their combos, like it was something that you would figure out, and that was part of what kept you playing, or part of what made you keep depositing quarters, was to figure out what button combination would do what. Tekken 2 is really focused on, no, we are the serious fighting game focused on the technical aspects. Execute this button combo, we'll show you how.
Well, even the arcade, the arcade cabinet too, because Tyler, when we went to the Retro Game Expo, we played, I don't remember which Tekken we played, but we did one of them, and it had the combos on top of the cabinet itself, so it gave you a little bit of help. Obviously it wasn't every combo, but it gave you a starting point.
I feel like this is the reason that our generation gets labeled as being such pansies and just sort of we want trophies for everything. It's because we had practice mode. Back in the day, you had to wash your granddad's car, get that roll of quarters, right? Put it in your pocket, go down to the arcade, and if you just had to lose. You just had to play, get your ass kicked until you got good. There was no practice mode. We've engendered a whole generation of wimps because of games like Tekken 2 changing the way that God intended games to be played.
Yeah, we wouldn't have incels if it wasn't for practice mode.
Someone had to say it.
Look, we were all thinking it. Let's talk about the characters. So Tekken as a series is famous for its imaginative characters, which did begin with the first game. It introduced Kuma the bear, King the tiger-headed suit-wearing luchador, Yoshimitsu the mechanical, ninja, Jack, which was a big-ass robot, the devil form of Kazuya, and 2 would just continue to say fuck it with those characters and include a boxing dinosaur and kangaroo, and a literal angel.
Wait, hold up real quickly. I have to ask, King, the tiger-headed suit-wearing luchador, am I to understand that the the tiger, is that a mask? Is it a luchador mask, or is he a luchador fighter who has the head of a tiger?
It's a mask.
It's a mask. I've been playing since I was in high school. We went over this Tekken Tag Tournament. I just thought it was like an anamorph, he just sort of stalled on his progress and he had the head. I had no idea. I've never even seen a luchador wear a tiger mask. Is that common?
My partner had the exact same revelation when I was playing through these again, because King roars when he fights. He roars instead of grunts like a human. So and then I had to explain to them
his ending. He just growls. There's points in some of the endings where he'll go brah, 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 and you'll see captioned in the bottom in brackets as though it's being translated. The roars are translated, even though I think he's from Mexico, so it should be Spanish, but he just growls.
We have no idea, actually, what's under the mask. We've never seen King without the tiger mask. Is that correct?
I don't think so. Yeah, I don't think we see his face.
Ooh, I believe there's one scene.
So he might not be Mexican. He could just be another animal wearing a tiger mask.
I kind of got into a King deep dive when we found out that it was also just the mask, and I think he probably has one of the more interesting backstories of this character roster, since I think there are more than 2 Kings now, and not including Armor King, which is just gonna make it even more messy. But the King that's in Tekken 1 and 2 is the same character, and his whole deal is that he helps run an orphanage or something like that, and they're running out of funds. So he secretly wrestles under the guise of that jaguar mask to raise money for the orphanage. And it's like anything that is like even based on like a true story, because that Jack Black movie with Nacho Libre, I think that's based off of like somebody that actually did that.
Oh, so you're trying to tell me that canonically in the Tekken universe, King, the tiger-headed suit-wearing luchador, is actually Nacho Libre as played by Jack Black?
I mean, possibly. Yes. Yeah, they can't.
It's canon. Honestly, that's less absurd than some of the canon in this series.
Bro, all I'm saying is that video game adaptations are getting good, and I think this needs to be the next one that we get.
Is actually just a King story. And then they're gonna
like if you give me like I don't know Yoshi, like the story, give me one movie, right, like a kind of serious take where it's like Yoshimitsu versus like Kazuya, right, like that's the main story, but at the end like Jack Black shows up, you don't know it's Jack Black, right, like post credits, and he's wearing the tiger luchador mask and he pulls it off and it's all like, I want to talk to you about the Tekken initiative.
So we're gonna
not in like a raspy voice.
Tekken cinematic universe.
Yes, except he won't say anything. He'll just roar, and then it will be captioned at the bottom.
Translated with subtitles.
Dude, we're brilliant. I think, screw this podcast. Let's write a movie, guys.
If anything can be like a cinematic universe, it could probably be a fighting game, and I think Tekken is like such a good starting point. Because like you could like literally just do another like Nacho Libre type movie, but it's about King.
Yeah.
You can have a movie about like the family dynamics within the Mishima family. You can have like a cop buddy drama with Lee, I think it was. He's the police officer character.
I think it's Lei. It's Lei. There's
Or
an
Lei,
Lee and an Lei. But like him chasing down Nina Williams, who have kind of like a cop and robber situation, except she's like a super spy or something. But that's true. There's a lot of like individual threads of stories that don't really affect the main Mishima storyline, but there's always like Michelle and Julia Chang doing their own environmentalist thing. There's always Paul riding around on his motorcycle, never really contributing to the main plot, but always kind of being there. I feel like there's a lot of ways those could be expanded into individual movies. Well, Namco tried to do this with games too later. So there's like, we'll talk a bit about the legacy, but they did try and do Death by Degrees, which was a Nina Williams spin-off game. Have you guys heard of this?
No. This is brand new to me.
So it's terrible. It's like Resident Evil OG style camera angles, but it's a beat 'em up where the attacks are done with the right stick. But just think about those two things. It's like, these weird like Dutch camera angles where you flick a stick to attack in a specific direction and then walk into like a different frame, and so the camera changes, so the stick's positioning is different, and then it's like all on a ship, so it's that kind of like what is that, Resident Evil Revelations? So they're trying to rip off like a survival horror series but do a twin stick beat 'em up. It did not take off. They haven't done any other spin-offs like that.
I'd play a solo Nina Williams game, absolutely.
I think they could do it right at this point, but what they did at the time was not great. Who's everyone's main? You said June for you, Cameron?
June became mine, during while I was playing this game for the podcast. I ended up hanging on to June, and it's only because I have access to Tekken 2 on like multiple different devices, and like at any given time I had like a different device on me, or like I was playing on like the little PlayStation Classic thing that we have. But June is like the first character on that roster, so I just picked her basically to like start unlocking characters. But then I got used to how she plays, and I really liked her style.
As for me, I jumped readily into Michelle Chang. Basically, she was the only character I could survive a couple of rounds with. And I'm neither Chinese nor significantly Native American enough to be able to claim it. Even if you could, I mean, you guys can see me, but if anyone else could, you wouldn't even believe that I'm 164th according to Ancestry.com. But I definitely connect with the cowboy boots wearing element of her character, and I thought, you know what? I'm not built like any of these guys. I'm not built like any of these ladies, but I do own a pair of cowboy boots. So let's go, Michelle. You and me, girl. Let's party.
I ended up maining Lei, so the cop who's definitely not based on Jackie Chan, which many of the characters have fairly easy one-to-one similarities with either celebrities or other like anime characters. Like Paul is just a JoJo character but in 3D. And so Lei is definitely what's that Jackie Chan movie from the 90s? It's like Chaos and Bronx, or
Rumble
you know
in the
what I'm
Bronx.
talking about? Thank you. I'm pretty sure that's what Lei is a direct rip on, but he felt like the most fluid one. He does this kind of thing where he like walks back and forth kind of into the foreground and into the background. It doesn't affect the game that much, but he's got this more sort of maneuverability, and the moves just felt like they flowed more naturally into one another. I think some of that might be that Lei was created specifically for the second game, so I think they had kind of a better handle on how to create something that was a bit less, I don't know, stiff. Same with June, actually, as I'm looking at the characters that are new. So it's funny that Kameron, you and I landed on those sort of newer ones, while Jacob, you're stuck in the past, man.
Yeah, well, that's only because I couldn't unlock any of the newer ones. So.
Well, yeah, June. Once I figured out, like, once I was able to once I caught on to how she played, there's a lot of her combos start from like a very specific button press. Like what would be on a PlayStation controller. It would be like square and circle. Like if you push those at the same time, it opens up a like sort of drunken style boxing type combo, and you can link that into almost a good chunk of her other combos. And I really resonated with that. But it was cool. I found myself doing much better once it clicked.
And that is the thing with Tekken. I feel like you need to find a character's sort of hook, and at that point when you can sort of dig into the one move and then find the way that those moves link into other moves, it's you really get a feel for them as you move along, as opposed to sort of what something like Street Fighter has turned into, where every character's got sort of the same inputs that you enter, but they do different things. It's more about just like figuring out that set of like 6 different moves and how they interact. Tekken has such a huge move list, and the ways that things flow into one another is very distinct.
Did you guys ever see the Guy Ritchie Sherlock Holmes movie with Robert Downey Jr.?
Yeah.
Okay, you remember there's that moment where he's bare knuckle boxing, right? That's a fight that he gets into, and in the whole scene, it like goes slow motion, and as he narrates what his actions are going to do, and he sort of like predicts the whole fight. And it all happens in slow motion, and then at the end it reverts back to the beginning, and it's him executing all of it in real time, and it's just like bing bang boom, and that fight's over. And that's what I think, like these people who have like dedicated fighting game controllers, right? The people who cut their teeth on Tekken back in the day, who were super invested, like that has got to be how their brains are wired, right? Where they can look at this moment and see an opening in like just split second timing and know to execute, square, square, triangle, circle, square, and pull off that combo. It's just beyond me. I have absolutely no gaming ability to pull that off at all.
Yeah, once you get into like the fighting game scene, like you're kind of stuck there. Like I've met, not that the area I grew up in had a very like massive arcade scene, and like not with Tekken specifically, but we had like one arcade that had I think it was an SNK versus Capcom 2, I want to say, and that was like the biggest fighting game that our arcade had. But so many of my friends that were like really big into that game, whenever I would talk about other games, they had like no clue what I was talking about. Like I would bring up, like around this time, I think that that game Braid came out, like that indie game where you can like rewind time and whatever.
Oh no shit! So we're talking like late 2000s.
Yeah. So I brought it up with a friend of mine who was like really big into SNK versus Capcom. Oh no, I think it's the other way around, Capcom versus SNK. Because I just wanted to chat up video games with him, and I'm like, oh yeah, I'm playing this game called Braid right now, and he's like, oh, what's that? I'm like, oh, it's it's an indie game, and he's like, what's an indie game? So it's like once you're in the fighting game scene, you it's you basically nothing.
It's tunnel vision, right? It's like, wait, no, I don't understand. So in Braid, you rewind time, but who do you fight?
Yeah, exactly.
Who do you win? Who do you annihilate? Who do you dominate?
What is solving puzzles? I don't understand. But it was kind of like that. I didn't know how to carry a conversation after that.
With Tekken, typically you'd hold a controller like the two thumbs and the one thumb presses the face buttons. But there's some combos that use the buttons that are sort of across the way from one another, so like triangle and X. And so there were points where I would kind of like claw my hand on it and like press things with like two fingers rather than the thumb.
Yeah, that's how June's combo starts.
And I haven't ever really felt myself doing that with any other game. But I feel like Tekken sort of does demand either a fight stick or for you to twist your hand weird.
That's fascinating. If you really think about it, like games are, especially in the modern day, I think that there is an argument to be made. In fact, I'll make a little bit of it right now, that gameplay is sort of atrophied in terms of, I guess, like user interface, user experience. And what developers are constantly trying to do is make that controller feel almost second nature in your hand, and get rid of that friction between, you holding the controller and what your character is doing on screen. And if I may get a little bit theater nerdy about it, like maybe video games could really do with someone who leads like a sort of Brechtian resurgence, where they're looking to like add that friction back into the experience. Don't make it seamless. Make me hold that controller in weird ways. Really give like a certain complication here. Don't let it be a seamless experience. I don't know. I think maybe there's a potential, maybe it's cult, but a small market for that.
There's some the old Monster Hunter games on the PSPs. There was something called, like, I think it was like a hook, like a fish hook grip, where you would hold, because of the amount of buttons that you needed to press in order to execute certain attacks. Like, you would just have your thumb on one button and your pointer finger would move from like the right shoulder button and hit some of the face buttons. And then even more ridiculous is the old Armored Core games, which we'll get in an episode in the future. But there's an Armored Core grip where you basically hold the controller backwards, where the face buttons and the control sticks are facing away from you, but you use your the other four digits to hit all the buttons and the joysticks. Yeah, it's insane.
Fascinating.
There's a really good Masahiro Sakurai, the director of the Smash Bros games, inventor of Kirby, all around neat guy, has a YouTube series that he runs now, which is just like Masahiro Sakurai on creating games. And he did an episode very recently, it's fantastic, about the standardization of game controls. Specifically, he was talking mostly about FPSs, how there is a very standard way that those run. And if you were playing an FPS and hit R2 and didn't shoot, it doesn't feel right anymore because that's been so shorthanded. Sometimes you won't even see it in tutorials because that level of sort of basic control is assumed. But he also argues for, messing things up and trying something different. Yeah. Like, I would say before Demon's Souls, the concept of attacking in like a 3D character action game with R1 and R2 was fairly absurd. It would have been square, probably. Square seems to be the punch.
That's true.
So yeah, I think there are those sort of benchmark changes. And then it also comes with whatever the shape of the controller is, right? Like the Wiimote was its own thing entirely, designed somewhat to be more user-friendly because it was more simple, but then created a bunch of different, more complex ways to interact with the product itself. In recent years, it's really kind of stagnated, maybe as people have sort of been like, oh, this is just what the controls are, this is natural, and experimentation seems like it's being discouraged more often, especially with big AAA releases where there's so much money riding on the line. But in the indie scene too, I feel like there is maybe a bit of stagnation in like, oh, well, this is just what we do now. This is the shared language of games, whereas it doesn't necessarily have to be. Okay, let's talk about how characters unlock. It is different between the two versions. In the arcade, they did something innovative to keep players returning past the first couple of visits. Additional characters would be added as time-based releases. So after the system was plugged in for a long enough time, those additional characters would just kind of get dropped in. So the, thought there is keep people visiting, see if some new character has unlocked in that weird secret area of the character select screen. You just kind of keep clicking to the left or right and new heads appear for new characters. Whereas in the home console version, you have to finish an arcade mode run with a character, and then the penultimate boss will be whatever character you're about to unlock. So it corresponds with the base set of characters. I think it's like Nina will unlock Anna, and it sort of corresponds with the character's backstory, like Yoshimitsu, and I think her name is Kunitsu. But then sometimes it seems like they just kind of ran out of other options and were like, throw Baek in. So that's characters.
So talk to me about the plot of Tekken, because I understand that there is a story, but I'm not going to pretend for a second like I followed it.
I love the Tekken plot, and unironically, I love the Tekken plot because it does stuff that other media just doesn't really do with story progression. So as a whole, Tekken ostensibly revolves around the King of Iron Fist tournament, but the real drama comes from the Mishima family, who run a financial group called the Mishima Zaibatsu. The patriarch, and I think the most iconic character in the series, is Heihachi Mishima, who is an old man with excellent pointy hair. In Tekken
Which
1,
is
the main
itself
character...
an accomplishment, because being old and having excellent hair, like, that's genetics, sure, but that's also like a good hair care routine, good skin care, getting the right nutrients into your body. Heihachi's on some real next level shit.
Yeah, hair doesn't naturally stick up that way, so I assume he has some sort of morning routine that he kind of like grabs the two little antennae on the back of his head and like slicks them up. Hairspray, I don't know. So in Tekken 1, we'll just go over really briefly, the main character is Kazuya Mishima, who is Heihachi's son, who he literally throws into a ravine when the kid is 5 to test the boy's strength. That sort of gets retconned later. We're not going to worry about it. Kazuya does not die from this fall and understandably hates his dad moving forward. So he enters the tournament that Heihachi throws. This is when he's older. I think Kazuya is probably like 18 in the first game.
Five-year-old Kazuya.
Little 5-year-old. There is the first part of Tekken 7 is you play as 5-year-old Kazuya, like beating up, like the tutorial is like throw punches at your old man. And then there's a button prompt to throw Kazuya into the ravine. So, like, you then are playing as Heihachi, and I think you hit, like, triangle and square, and that's what tosses him.
All I'm saying is we were talking about this earlier, right? That the world that we're living in, we got incels. When in reality, if we had just been more willing to throw 5-year-olds off of ravines, we'd have a lot more Kazuyas in this world. And there's just not enough of them. That's all I'm saying.
I agree. More child abuse is necessary to really fix America. Kazuya enters the King of Iron Fist Tournament 1 to beat the shit out of his dad and take over the company, which he does. He then beats Heihachi and throws the old man into the ravine, that same ravine, the Circle of Life, and then takes over the Zaibatsu. Now, the interesting thing about Tekken, the way that it unfolds narratively, is in the second game, it retcons an aspect of the first to say that Kazuya made a literal deal with the devil to win the fight against his father. The dark side of him takes over in this fight, and he builds both his dark power and the power of the Zaibatsu. He then announces in the second game the King of Iron Fist Tournament 2, where he promises a prize of 1,000 times the last competition's prize. Now Heihachi, having survived his ravine plunge, enters the tournament to reclaim his place and also murder his son. In Heihachi's ending, in Tekken 2, he throws Kazuya into an active volcano. This is the canon ending of the game, and Heihachi in the second game is the protagonist. So you swap protagonist and antagonist in game 1 to game 2.
Amazing. This is real melodrama here.
Yeah, it's good stuff. I mean, like, the closest thing I could think of is like the more modern Mortal Kombat games, because I think they really knocked it out of the park with their narratives. But like at this time, I think Tekken really kind of mopped the floor with everybody else when it came to their storytelling.
Mopping them up with demon blood, baby.
So you said the whole deal with the devil was that a retcon, or like did Tekken not have any? Did the first Tekken not have any indication that Kazuya made a deal with the devil to win?
I don't think so. I believe they take that palette swap and make it canon. So in the first game, it's just cosmetic. And then in the second game, they're like, okay, but like that'd be kind of cool, right? If he was like actually Satan. So I believe that's sort of a retcon, him making the deal. But then in Tekken 7, you learn that Heihachi throws Kazuya into the ravine because Heihachi's mom turns out to be a demon, and so he thinks that Kazuya has the demon gene in him, and Kazuya being tossed into the ravine and surviving confirms Heihachi's belief that he has demon blood, which is why the father and son hate each other so much. It's called the devil gene.
Oh no, because the devil gene is such a huge plot point of the Tekken series. Like it's because it gets passed down, right? Because Jin, Kazuya's son, also has the devil gene. Because like in Tekken Dark Resurrection, there's like someone older than Heihachi that also has the devil gene. But I think
Jinpachi Mishima.
Yeah, and I think Heihachi's like the only one that doesn't have the devil gene, right?
I think he's just regular old man strong, whereas all the other characters who have that level of strength have some sort of devil gene in it. And I just want to say, I only noticed this playing through Tekken 7, the way they pronounce Jin. They pronounce it Gene. And so I think it's a pun on, like, not a pun, but like a wordplay thing where it's the devil Gene, Gene, but Gene is spelled Jin, and so they're like, see, it's the gene.
So
I'm putting together here, like, this is crazy to me, that the hero of the Tekken series seems to be, if you're viewing it at least through the principles of, say, Judeo-Christian belief, that Heihachi, the abusive old man, is true. The one who hurts his child is really the hero that you should be rooting for. So if you're a Tekken fan, I think there might be a lot of crossover with if you're a Trump supporter.
Heihachi is the version of Trump that his supporters see. Like when they look at Trump, they see Heihachi Mishima.
Rather than like a dumpy old orange man, he's strong.
Yeah, like every time I see, like, not to get so political about this, but every time I see like somebody drawing fan art of Trump, when he's always just like ripped to shreds, with two ARs in both hands, and I'm like, why do they view him like this? And it's like, oh, it's because he Heihachi Mishima. It's all Tekken imagery. It's all Tekken imagery.
You're right, because what we're describing here, this whole like demon gene shit is so Japanese. But if truly, I think we could solve some of the like cultural clashing happening between like left and right in America if we just made our own version of Tekken, and it just starred like the most idolized version of a couple of American politicians.
Our own King of Iron Fist.
Our own King of Iron Fist, yeah. Except it would be President of Steel Festival or something, that would be.
Yeah, we'll just toss Biden and Trump in the ring together and just kind of let them just fisticuffs, just go all out. See what.
Who would win in that fight? Now I'm trying to, because Biden's an old fragile man, but Trump is a large fragile man.
In an honest to God fight, Donald Trump is Heihachi Trump is winning that battle, right? Like, and I don't even care, like, if like that whole like Dark Brandon meme, and like it's Biden like shooting lasers out of his eyes. That's what the devil in Tekken does. That's the devil's ability.
I was gonna say, I think Joe Biden has the devil gene and is gonna like, his eyes will glow, and he's like, if you don't vote for me, then you ain't black, and then he shoots laser beams out.
That's crazy. I think we just discovered that the 2024 election is actually the King of Iron Fist tournament.
We sort of went over my next point, which is it's weird to have a fighter. In contrast to Street Fighter, we don't have Ryu, we don't have a Terry like in King of Fighters. There's not a central good guy. I guess Heihachi sort of falls into it, but it does change based on the situation. There's a lot of moral grays to it. Following to, the series would then settle on the next Mishima, who goes by the surname Kazama after June. So June's son with Kazuya is Jin Kazama. He's the protagonist for 3, 4, kind of 5. He's generally the good guy until Tekken 6, but in Tekken 6 he does the biggest heel turn of them all and launches a war against all nations, literally declares war on the world as the head of the Mishima Zaibatsu. So it's all about anti-heroics, moral grays. I think that's neat. He's not in 7, and then 7 is all just Heihachi and Kazuya just punching each other. That's the whole game. And then I think they're setting Jin up to be the protagonist for 8 again.
I didn't know that. I didn't know that about Tekken 6.
And Jun is coming back for 8, Cameron.
Yeah.
So your main will return after only being playable in 2 in the tag tournaments.
I'm happy about that. Yeah. It took me a while to put together that the Jun that I was playing as is Jin's mother. Like, I didn't realize it was the same person.
And you see her moveset in some other characters, like Asuka Kazama, I think is like a cousin to Jin or something. They introduce her in 5. She has some of Jun's moveset, but it's a little more like rough and tumble, where Jun feels a little more like fluid and dancey. Real quick, we're just going to go over a couple nods to the future chronology of the series that you see in 2. In Wang's ending, Old Man Wang of Tekken 2, he walks up and pours some sake on a grave labeled Jinpachi Mishima. This is the first time we see this name. That's Heihachi's dad, and then he's the main antagonist of Tekken 5 or Tekken Dark Resurrection. He's buried under the dojo, I think, and then gets freed when the dojo gets blown up in 5. And then I lost my place because I was thinking too hard about Jinpachi. Oh yeah, and so in that dojo, there's a little bit of writing that you can see in Tekken 2. It's, just like a couple of little polygons on the bottom of the stage. And in it is the name Heihachi and Kazumi, which is Kazuya's mom, whose name we don't see referenced anywhere else until like Tekken 7, wherein they do a high-def version of that little carving on the ground in the story mode. So it's funny, it's like they're setting up these little breadcrumbs that they then follow up on like 15, 20 years later. It's weirdly plot-centric for a fighting game franchise.
Dang. I wonder if part of that too comes from the fact that, with fighting games, everybody, like every character gets like their own ending, and they can kind of just throw out all these ideas and then see which one sticks, or like, take an idea and see how they can expand it into like the main canon plot line. Sort of like how the devil form was just a cosmetic and then they turned it into an actual like canon thing.
And we should talk a bit about those ending cutscenes because they are incredible. In this game, they are all animated flawlessly, and they hold up very well. That we're in early polygon era for this game, and so the face twisting in some of these animations is disturbing. I would describe as almost nightmarish. I don't know if you would agree with that.
Yes. The content here is very specifically creepypasta like style. I think this is the level that like AI art is at right now.
Oh my god, you're right.
It's the Lee ending in particular. He does a little like martial arts routine with Paul, and then Paul like is smug, and you can see like the animators using like the click and drag like Mario's face in Mario 64 to tug his like upper lip up, and do you get the frame that I'm talking about? I'll see if I can find it, but it's horrifying. It's almost like the worst version of the DreamWorks face, with the one cocked eyebrow.
That's the look I used to give to every romantic potential partner that I could have, which is why I never dated a whole lot.
There's this guy from across the dance floor who kept moving his lips in a diagonal fashion at me. So the canon ending is Heihachi, where he throws his son into an active volcano. At the same time, there's other endings that could conceivably happen. They don't necessarily contradict anything else that happened in the series.
You mean like a sexual perversion one where one woman walks in on another just bare ass naked and takes a Polaroid picture of her?
Her sister, no less.
It's her sister.
This is an incestual, non-consensual nude.
That's Nina and Anna, right?
So I believe it's Nina takes a picture of Anna, or is it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. Nina goes in, Anna's in the shower, and Nina takes a picture of her, like a Polaroid, with, I guess, the intent to distribute it illegally on the internet.
Yeah, they don't really explain what's going on there. There's so much only so much you can do in these cutscenes.
This is case in point for why we support women in video games, is because we need to not have this for the record of just what men thought. This is what women do. You can just imagine some like neckbeard like Redditor who's just all like, actually, revenge porn is something that women do on each other more than men do on them.
This is how they really get at each other. They take naked pictures of one another and go, ooh, and then they angrily kiss each other and touch each other's boobs. It's so embarrassing. The other ones I think are really important to hit is King's ending, which, so in the Tekken 1, there's a bunch of like real children, not CG animated, but like FMV versions of real children running out of an orphanage in Christmas, and they run up to King and they go, yeah, we're kids, but they're real, and it's sort of unsettling. And then in Tekken 2, he walks up and he sees through like a window this real woman, like an actual filmed woman with these real children, and then they all run out of this very clearly like early CG house towards King. It's so unsettling.
That should be required viewing every Christmas. If you just throw like a nice little Christmas jingle on top of it, I think it's a really heartwarming story about how some kids, like, you know, maybe King was visited by the ghosts of, you know, Christmas past, present, and future.
I think the other big one is Kuma's, which is again the series establishing sort of this running joke continuity. There's the main plot, but there's these sort of repeated side stories, as we'd mentioned before, that continue to be iterated on. Kuma's ending is Paul's ending from the first game, but redone with a bear. So it's Kuma doing the exact same moves and the exact same, like he does a little wall punch where there's a like angry little Kazuya face on it while Heihachi is watching over him. It's really sort of strange that they're already establishing that sort of interwoven jokiness at this stage when the games are releasing so tight to one another. Couple of things to hit on that I also think are interesting about the game. There's cheat codes in it. Now, when we first booted up Tekken 2, we thought there'd be like an unlock all characters cheat. There was not. You, in fact, have to unlock all the characters first before you can get to the cheats, but there's 3 big ones that are in this Tekken and no others. There is Sky Mode, which changes the physics to make the combos easier, so you can air combo people. They stay hovering longer. There's a wireframe mode, which makes the game look like Punch-Out. The camera moves behind the character. You turn into a green wireframe. The controls are the same, but it's cool. Like this sort of pseudo first-person perspective. And then there's big head mode. Because it's the 90s, you gotta have a big head mode.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, dude, big head mode was the best, man. Tony Hawk, big head mode. That was
big head mode.
Oh my god, I forgot about GoldenEye big head mode.
I guess it was DK mode, so they not only did they have big heads, but they also had big hands and big feet.
I love this. I love that, like, you have your cheat codes, but first you gotta be good at the game before you get them.
You have to earn it.
You have to earn it. That's what I'm saying. Is we don't want to breed another generation of wimps.
I want to go back to the wireframe mode. So wait, does it actually the game goes into a first person sort of, or like behind the shoulder?
Yeah, if you've ever seen the arcade Punch-Out, it looks almost identical to that, where there's the wireframe, a green wireframe shape of the character you're playing as, and so you see the head-on model of the opponent. And, you know, all the moves are the same, and I don't think it's like the camera spins when your character spins, you know, like Yoshimitsu would be 360 no-scoping a bunch, but I think it just sort of stays behind you. So it's the same game, the same controls, but viewed from a different angle.
That's wild. Have you guys ever seen David Lynch's Dune?
I have. And it's weird. This is the second day in a row this movie has come up. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you know, again, like I love this bit in that movie. It's when they do the armor and that like the polygon like shapes like go over Kyle MacLachlan and I think it's Patrick Stewart, and they fight one another in like training combat. And that's very much like what wireframe mode looks like.
Another one of those things where I do wish it was unlocked from the start, because I think it would be neat to jump in, and I don't feel like playing arcade mode for 15 hours, but
Yeah, I'm looking at it now. I didn't know
neat.
that this
Looks
was
fun.
a thing that existed, and my mind is blown.
I don't know that there's that much to say about the music. There's a difference between the arcade and the PlayStation versions. I think the home console release is a little better. I do think the opening theme is a fucking banger and has not been replicated in quality by any composition since. There's this one part in the opening song where it does like a shift. It's got this really like hard like sort of electronic beat, and then when it cuts to Nina just like chilling in a silky dress, it turns into these little chimes, and it's like do 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 do, and then it goes ba 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 back at it. I just feel like the matching with the opening cinematic is also the game trying to establish this sort of visual identity where it's syncing up the sort of the vibes with whatever you're seeing on screen. Tekken 2 reviewed stupidly well. It sits at a 93% on game rankings and an 89 on Metacritic. Take that for what you will. It did get a 38 out of 40 with Famitsu, which is the big Japanese gaming publication. Won Best Fighting Game of the Year at GamePro and Electronic Gaming Monthly, as well as EGM's overall PlayStation Game of the Year. It really was a pretty big critical darling at the time. The arcade version was the highest grossing arcade game in Japan in 1996, sold about 15,000 units, which sounds small to me, but, you know, I guess those numbers are different than anything in home. The PlayStation port sold over 1 million copies within the year in Japan and the US, and was at the time the second highest selling PlayStation game in Europe. It's actually credited in a March 1997 issue of Computer and Video Games for increasing the PlayStation UK install base to 750,000. I don't know how, verify that, but it sounds important. Overall, Tekken 2 is the 15th highest selling game for the PlayStation 1 console, having moved, in the end, looks like 5,700,000 units, which, especially given the time, that's pretty wild. It's a fairly staggeringly large number. Tekken 2 received quite a bit of ports and re-releases, including a PlayStation Greatest Hits re-release, the ones with the garish green labels on the side. You know the one. The arcade version was included as an unlockable in the PS2 version of Tekken 5. We talked about that earlier. And it was released on the PlayStation Network for PSP and PS3 in late 2006 and early 2001, respectively. As of this recording, Tekken 2 can be purchased on the PS4 and PS5 store, where it comes with a little save state and rewind function. Weirdly, of the 3 original trilogy games, it's the only one available on modern consoles and can be streamed through PS Plus, which I do not recommend doing. I tried doing it to, start with this series, and the delay was insane. I ended up just buying it.
I didn't realize this, but for it to be named one of the best games, or the best game for the PlayStation the year it came out, puts it in direct competition with the original Resident Evil.
I have some thoughts on Resident Evil 1. I can't wait for people to get mad at me about it. More interesting to me are the cell phone releases. As early as November of 2006 in Japan and December 2008 in the US, fully 3D releases, with the former being released almost a full year prior to the release of the iPhone. Japanese cell phones, man, they had their own little gaming market there that I do not understand. Seemed very significant. To me, the most fascinating release, and I hope you'll pardon the tangent on this, is for the South American exclusive system, the Zeebo. The Zeebo was created for Brazilian and Mexican markets in an effort to curb the rampant software piracy taking place within those regions. It released as a digital-only system enabled with 3G in 2009, way predating the digital-only PS5s and Series S's of today. But before you think it was way ahead of its time, it was really more of the opposite, barely playing versions of PopCap games and absolutely crap racing games. Think of stuff you'd play in Flash on the computer at the school library when you had like a free period. Now think of Flash games that control badly and have the active capacity to brick your system because of bugs, as happened with the Zeebo release of Ridge Racer. I can't begin to cover this thing in detail. I do recommend YouTube videos by Stop Skeletons from Fighting. They're the only English-speaking creators I've found who cover every game on the thing. Now, the reason I bring this up is that among the shovelware, the Zeebo contains a shockingly well-crafted port of Tekken 2. Now, keep in mind this is October of 2009, well after the release of Tekken 6. My theory is that 2 was probably the most technologically advanced fighting game that Namco could get up and running after pledging support for the system, making it probably the best Zeebo game available. This thing was only online for something like a year and a half. Despite several of its limitations, there's the removal of the ending movies, which is unforgivable because we can't see Paul's face. Still, I can't help but marvel that in Latin America, some kid's first experience with Tekken was probably the Zeebo port of Tekken 2, and I find that sort of endearing and sweet.
I did watch some footage of Tekken 2 running on the Zeebo, and I guess like that channel also kind of went over the Zeebo's like operating system too, and it's like very I don't even know how to describe it, but it's just like it's very of the time. And like I can't imagine like having this thing and playing like really crappy racing games and then standing tall, high and mighty as Tekken 2, just the absolute dominant winner of this system.
This big chunky unit.
If you could get like a hold of the Zeebo and then like just the console and like take a picture, not with the controller, but just the console itself, you could post that on like some site and just be all like new game console announced. And I think it'd make its rounds. Like people would buy it. I think it's a futuristic looking console.
The English speaking market, still pretty much knows nothing about it, so you might be able to fake that. There's like a fake Wiimote for it as well. I think it's more of a boomerang. So it was trying to cut into the Wii, the other like black market stuff in Latin America, as well as like the mobile game market with the 3G stuff. It's just so weird and so misguided because everyone in Brazil just wants to keep playing their Sega Master System. While it reviewed tremendously well at the time, I can't help but feel that Tekken 2 has been vastly overshadowed by the sequel following it, Tekken 3. Tekken 3 is, if we're being realistic, a vast improvement over its predecessor both graphically and mechanically. It also renewed focus on the third dimension, allowing characters to sidestep more easily, and added the absolute legend that is Eddie Gordo, who highlights just how much smoother 3 feels overall compared to the more tactical and stiff Tekken 2, which absolutely could not have a capoeira fighter in it.
I fully believe that Eddie Gordo was like personal inspiration for Lil Nas X.
You know, he would probably agree.
It also threw even more emphasis into the side content, including a full beat-em-up campaign and a beach volleyball mode.
Oh, did it do it before Dead or Alive? That's crazy.
It did, very much so. Tekken as a series has persisted and continues to be one of the more consistent and better received fighting game series to this day, continuing with a pair of tag tournaments, a fascinatingly terrible PS2 brawler/Resident Evil hybrid that we talked about earlier, a shockingly good Game Boy Advance game, an unfortunate crossover with Street Fighter, and continuing with numbered entries up to Tekken 8, set to release probably around the same time as this recording in January of 2024 for the PS5, Series X/S, and PC. And with all the iterations that followed, improving upon the core concept, I still have a lot of love for Tekken 2, and I don't think it should be viewed as just a stepping stone on the way to something greater, but what it was in reality, a crunchy, deliberate, and carefully crafted fighting game that manages to stay fun in its own right even today, played on a pristine PS1 on an island in Washington with some friends.
Thank you guys for joining us. Please stay tuned because the next episode of Mics and Memory Cards will be featuring the classic PlayStation 1 game Crash Bandicoot. Really excited to get into that story. Our boy Tyler here has done some amazing research on it, so I think you guys are really going to love this story. My name's Jacob.
I'm Tyler.
And I'm Kameron.
And this is Of Mics and Memory Cards.